So today on the channel, we're talking public land versus private land. And I recently heard a pretty good take on the Deer Hunter podcast and have some thoughts. So Dan and Fault was on the Deer Hunter podcast and they were breaking down this growing debate on the internet, if you will, of public land versus private land and who's a better deer hunter.
There's something to be said about people that are accessing public land versus people that are doing stuff on private land. Like you talked about the amount of work that goes into it, front end versus back end.
And they took some down the road takes and they had some good points. And I got some ads as somebody who's hunted a decent amount of both and has talked to guys who hunt some private land at a really high level and some public land at a really high level. But I almost look at it in the sense of basketball, right? If we're looking at basketball and deer hunters, a guy may be really good at dribbling and shooting, but he can't defend, he's pretty small, and sometimes he gets lost in a 5-on-5 match. And so I think as a deer hunter, we got to look at this. If we're drafting a basketball team of 5, who we taking and why is the best? And I get that this is going to be a little hot take or a little controversial, but I think that's important. And I think a few things here. We're looking at guys that can kill the top 1/3-ish bucks, right? If there's 10 bucks in a square mile, they're going to kill the 2 or 3 biggest, I think, for this particular breakdown. But I like the basketball analogy of give me a guy who can play defense, rebound, make the right decision if he gets doubled, and also probably score the basketball, right? Carmelo Anthony, great scorer. Why did he never do very good? Well, he's not exactly in shape ever. His game is one-dimensional. He sometimes didn't even care about defense. James Harden is another guy that comes to mind with these kind of abilities, right? He can only do one thing really well. So I think you look at guys that are the best have probably done it in both. Or maybe they've done it in multiple habitats, right? Because deer definitely hunt differently in farm ground to big woods to probably swamps. I can't speak to that. I haven't hunted a ton of deer in swamps. To the plains and grasses, right? That environment, habitat, what they eat, where they like to bed. Those different environments play very different. There are hillsides in the big woods that the wind just does whatever it wants to at a given moment, I feel like. And then in the prairies and grasses, well, sometimes you don't even have a tree to hunt out of. So if you can't ground hunt, you're not in the game there. So I definitely think the best hunter, right, is a guy or somebody who has done it in multiple habitats, not just one time, rinse and repeat. I think deer numbers are also something to think about. If a guy's killed deer in low deer numbers and high deer numbers, because I got to hunt a farm a few years ago that had very high deer numbers and struggled there. I think that is something I take for granted, that I don't have to dodge as many eyes. Now that being said, I saw a shit ton of deer, right? So my just raw ability to kill a deer was very high because of high deer numbers versus, I can walk a whole hillside and not kick anything up. But yes, dodging deer eyes, I think, is a skill set that if you don't hunt a lot of high deer number areas, you could struggle with, because I think a lot of the guys talk about big bucks. It's not necessarily beating his senses, eyes, nose, but you got to let some does and stuff filter past you. And that is something I don't have a ton of experience with necessarily. The private land aspect, sometimes you can just learn a piece over time and be really good at setting the mousetrap, right? And rinse and repeat. So if a guy has done that for the last 5 years where he's like, oh yeah, if I hunt this stand late October, it's pretty good. And if I don't kill, well, I got this other really good pinch. And generally in the week of the rut, I'm going to shoot a good one. Okay, that scenario doesn't necessarily play out as much on public, because that one pinch may not have a deer in the square mile that is very big or very good, or maybe a squirrel hunter's been there all week blowing that spot up, because he got a 410, he's 11 years old, and he just want to get in the woods. That can happen. Private land guy may not have the abilities to go anywhere, look at the woods and see what's going on, right? Somebody who's not necessarily scouting as much, I think, gives it a little bit of nod to the public land guy that has broken down several pieces in the last 10 years, can walk in there and be like, oh yeah, the deer are doing this. He's just got practice doing that. I think that's a skill set in this parameter, right? We should be able to blindfold this best hunter, drop them in Georgia, Tennessee, maybe out in the western mountains or plain states, and they got to be able to find a nice rack deer and kill it. So if you don't have experience scouting multiple pieces in a given year or over a 5-year period, like I think that's not as you're not as well versed. Shooting does and killing deer final 10 seconds. I might give the nod to the private land guy here because I think the public land guy sometimes just struggle to kill deer, and we as a group always had the debate of this is not a doe killing spot, and then you have does in range and you don't end up shooting them. Sometimes the fill in the freezer aspect isn't something we have the most practice with. I look back at my last 15 years in which I would have shot a few more deer with the bow, does included. It's just one of those things that now I'm like, that final 10 seconds, just because he's at 20 yards and, he's there and you have your bow in your hand and you're not shooting him, you didn't kill him still. You still got to execute the shot at an elevated heart rate. I don't know. I give the nod to some guys that have killed a lot of deer. I think that's a good, if we're creating this best hunter, somebody who's killed a lot of deer is somebody we're going to look at. Now, I had an interesting note here, not brought up on the Deer Hunter podcast. The guys killing deer late season. Like, I don't know many public land guys that are killing deer late season. And if they are, they're a savage. Generally those deer have been shot at. They've survived gun week. If you look, especially like in the farm ground, a lot of the winter bedding and habitat that would be favorable for whitetails to bed in, well, the rabbits are in there, and those rabbit guys are in there a lot, right? So I do think, there's an aspect there that, okay, late season definitely favors the private land guy. So, in conclusion, and I'd be interested to hear your guys' thoughts, public land, private land, or if you're just building this best hunter, I think you got to have somebody who's done a little bit of both in both multiple habitats. I think that's what the theme comes down to. Yeah, I feel like give me a guy who can do both or has done both, public, private. I think if you've hunted some high pressure states, you've got to be elevated. And that's where, like, if you're killing 100-inch deer in Michigan, PA, to me, you're just as much a savage as somebody killing 150s in the core of the Midwest. Because just in the scale of things, that's upper end. But yeah, I think to build this best hunter, I think my concluding thoughts are, if I was creating this guy, he's got to have done multiple states, habitats, probably done a little mix of public, private, and that's the winner. So, be interested in your guys' thoughts. I think it's a fun topic to discuss. Leave me a comment. Appreciate you guys. Team Harder and Bucks. We're out.